Hello and welcome to episode, whatever number it is, of the Digital Access Show. Yes, I've lost count. We've had some amazing guests. Last week we had a wonderful lady called Meryl Evans, who was born profoundly deaf and was very much she lives in USA, and we talked about the differences between the USA and Australia and digital accessibility and did a bit of a comparison. And yeah, shock of shocks, no surprises there. There's not much different. And in reality, it's going to be a long time before everyone uses digital accessible techniques. This week, I want to go to the other end of the spectrum. My guest this week is a wonderful lady who I met through Studio Pilates. In reality, she actually is the owner of the Studio Pilates Hamilton Portside in Brisbane. I was going to say website business. And I do Pilates. And then when Amber and I started talking, we had a few other things in common. Amber Adcock, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
You're welcome. My pleasure to be here.
I will tell you, Amber has rescued my shoes, rescued my sanity, made me laugh. But today we want to talk about something we both have in common. So, Amber, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself? And then we can discuss what we've got in common. And it's
Perfect,
not
can
vision.
do.
It's not a vision impairment.
So I have three children. I've got Lily, who's 7, and I've got Hugo, who is nearly turning 4 in May. And then we have little Freddie, who's our pocket rocket child. And so Hugo, our middle child, he was born premature. He was born at 27 weeks. He was 940 grams, which is tiny. I think when you're thinking that's under a kilo at the time, and it completely threw us, that whole situation. And yeah, so I obviously own Studio Pilates at Hamilton. We've had that studio since 2021, I believe, if I'm thinking back correctly. It's been quite the ride. And yeah, that's pretty much sums up me now.
The thing we've got in common, though, is our middle kids.
Yes. Our
Yeah.
little boys who are ASD. So my Hugo, the 27-week preemie baby, he only recently has been diagnosed with autism level 3 nonverbal.
Yeah.
And to get to that diagnosis was actually quite, I'd like to say ride, because there were no definitive answers. And as the mum, you have a gut feeling, and then you pay the professionals to be told otherwise, and then you sleep at night because you're like, okay, well, the one that went to university and who I've just paid $250 for, I said, no, he's fine. So you let it go till the next thing or the next comment from a family member or a friend, and then it's raised again. But yes, getting that diagnosis, although it was at the time mourning a bit of a loss, it was sad and it's hard to explain. I know there can be a lot of worse things that can happen, but I think you just want the best for your child, and then okay, this isn't going to be easy for them. And no one sits you down and says, okay, here's your diagnosis, this is what you need to do. Like, we were never given that. It was just, okay, so ASD level 3, that's the highest on the spectrum. He's nonverbal. I don't know if he will ever speak. It's too early to tell. That's a very common phrase. Too early to tell, which is
Yeah.
hard to hear as a parent, because you're like, okay, well, I understand that, but I'm just trying to map everything out in my head. So you
And
really just got to live in the now.
you've got these other children at the same time,
Yes.
but you've still got to care for them and provide for them. So my story was a little bit later than yours. So Nick was nearly 9. And the only reason he was diagnosed as my oldest son is ADHD. And I took him to the developmental pediatrician. And of course, where he went, Nick, my other 2 sons went. And Nick was over in the corner doing whatever Nick was doing. And the developmental pediatrician looked at me and said, yeah, your oldest one's ADHD, but that one's Asperger's. And I went, oh my gosh, where's my husband? He's at work. How am I going to handle this? And my youngest one's sitting there just being David, and he says, oh, he's normal. And I said, well, what's normal? They're all normal. But it it is really, it's an awful feeling that first few months, because you worry about where they're going to end up, where you're going to end up mentally and physically and emotionally.
Yes.
And what about the other kids and your husband and your marriage? And suddenly it all, to me, it nearly like it exploded a bit until I could say, pull your head in, settle, pedal, which became my saying for a long time, settle, pedal, and one step at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That expression, my person of that is Jed. He's the one who's always grounding, and like when I'm getting upset, he'll say,
Yeah.
you know, he's lucky to be alive. He's lucky to be here
Yeah.
with us. This isn't the worst thing that we could deal with. And I'm like, yep, okay, bring myself back down. But it's still okay to feel the way that we feel, in terms of, you know, you worry about the other kids, you worry about yourself, your marriage, everything that you said,
Yeah.
because it is a lot, and you
It
only want
is.
the best for your children, all of them, not
That's
just
it.
singling out one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are the communication challenges that you're currently experiencing with Hugo? And I never use the word barrier, because a barrier is something that can't be fixed. It blocks things. And I always say challenge, because 9 times out of 10, not all the time, but 9 times out of 10, there is a way around it. So, what are you experiencing at the moment, you and your husband, with Hugo and your other 2 kids? Because it's
I
a
would,
family unit.
yes, I would have to say that Hugo is getting better. I don't feel like we're in the worst of it at the moment, but what we're experiencing at the moment will probably be, I feel like Hugo knows in his mind more, like things that he wants, like he's got more drive to do or want things than he ever has, but he doesn't have the skill set to tell us, which is hard, because he will want something so randomly that he might have seen on TV that's etched in his mind, and he's like, okay, I'm going to do that, but we have no idea what he's talking about. So the frustration and the breakdown is massive. And then obviously Freddie and Lily are on the receiving end of it as well. They're there watching him have a breakdown, and I'm nearly borderline having a breakdown when, you're trying to work out what he wants. So I would definitely say that as he's getting older, he's exposed to more, and there's more things in his little mind that he wants to do that he just cannot communicate to us. Like, it's not as simple as just, I want toast, I want water, I want a milk. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it
I
will
do.
be, I do painting at kindy, so why are there no paints here? Or, he'll grab a makeup brush of mine and think it's for painting. And
Yeah,
then I'm trying to explain, no, that's not, I don't have paint. And
yeah,
then it's a breakdown. Like, it can be something so small. And you don't want him to feel like you're disregarding that as well.
yeah.
So you try so hard to work it out with little clues. But yeah, that's probably the hardest thing at the moment.
Yeah, I feel for you there, because I had the same, and it just, you don't know where to go with that communication challenge, because until he is able to become more verbal, or until there is a way that he will react to, and it all has to come from Hugo. It can't come from you saying, Hugo, we're going to use that computer and do this. because there could be too much on the computer screen that will distract him from what you want him to do.
Yeah.
And that, I know with Nick, well, we didn't have computers at that level back then, because we're talking, 20, 23 years ago. Oh gosh, I feel old. But even then, but I'm not, I'm definitely not old. But what I'm saying is the level of activities on a computer back then definitely aren't what they are there now. Do you find with Hugo that if you're on a computer with Hugo or doing an activity on an iPad or something, that he is very focused and he can do that quite happily? Or is there something with Hugo? I know for Nick, it was Thomas the Tank Engine, and there was this show called Hooly Dooly, and it was
I
those
remember
two
that
things.
show.
Yeah, well, that was sorry, I'm over Hooly Dooly, so don't dare sing it.
So it
I
was a
think
weird one, that one.
it was. I think the hammer went through the video cassette after about 40 on one day, over and over again, but it settled him. But Nick, the other one was AFL. Would you believe? AFL was the difference with Nick. He could sit and watch an AFL game as a 4 or 5 year old, and he loved it.
Yeah.
And it was always the Lions. I'm sorry, it was no Melbourne teams. It was no anything else. It was the Lion, and he was fascinated. And that's where his speech started coming in, because we ended up having to use things like AFL. What about
There you
you?
go.
Do you notice things with Hugo that you can say, well, maybe that's a channel in?
Um, he has his iPad, and I can tell you now that I have never seen a 3-year-old so good on an iPad,
Oh my
iPad
God.
or phone. And I think one thing we've noticed lately is he really is loving watching back videos of himself. And there's almost this element of he will grab my hands to film him, and he will do something and have a little smile on his face, and then he'll rewatch it. Mind you, he'll rewatch it probably 25 times on full volume, but that's fine.
Yeah.
That repetitive behavior. He does love his there's a Thomas game that he's just gotten into, and he started saying all the Thomas the Tank Engine's names. So it's like
Yeah.
Mia, Percy, Thomas, and then he'll actually have his iPad there and line his trains up and push one by one and say the names, which has only been a new thing, but it's stemmed from the repetitive
Mm.
Thomas the Tank Engine game, hearing that because it says at the same time in the
Mm.
same order every single time, as we all know, but we're just so used to it. It's background noise. So yeah, we have noticed that, and he does love, and this is probably frowned upon parenting, YouTube Kids. Although we have had to ban a few of the shows that he will watch because he will
Yeah.
watch Bluey in Japanese, and I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? I'm just like, all right, we're trying to speak here. We don't need you to start speaking Japanese. English would be great.
Oh,
So
I love
yeah,
it.
I know, and he will be obsessed with it. Like he'll put on ABC Kids iView app, he'll put Bluey on and somehow manage to change it to Japanese. And I don't know how, but whatever works.
Yeah.
So yeah, we do notice the repetitive watching or playing of games like that's helping with some of his speech.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We found the same. But with us, it was Jonathan Brown, Jason Ackermanis, um, Michael Voss. Oh my gosh. All and I'd sit there and think
On repeat.
on repeat. And I'd sit there and think, oh my gosh, I can say to this child, what do you want for lunch? And the only thing he'd say was what Peter says. Peter's my eldest son. And Peter would go, Nick wants a peanut plate. No, Nicholas has got to ask. But if he'd be watching footy, Michael Voss, Ackermanis. Oh, gosh sakes. AFL,
That is
sorry,
so
we weren't going to
cute.
talk AFL, but it does.
Here we are.
Here we go. AFL's had a big, profound effect on him. And one of the things I really noticed when Nick went to school, and it was Nick was obviously he had the problems all along, but when Nick did start school, he had big challenges with writing because he didn't have the fine motor skill that you need to
Yeah.
write and like to run. He didn't have the strength, the muscle strength, because he was very low muscle tone and
Yeah.
all these things. And where that impacted, obviously, with his communication, with his writing, with his education, it was a massive problem for us.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, for you, it's a different era because there's going to be a lot more laptop. And obviously, Hugo's already got it. He's got his iPad worked out. So there's a lot more help. And I'm really pleased about that for you. What what's the rules and what's the ages that these kids go to school now? Because he's nearly 4. So
Yeah.
how do you anticipate managing that education process with the extra communication needs that he's going to have and the accessibility needs?
Yeah. So we're in that, just circling back to that phrase, it's too soon to tell. We've been
Yeah.
hearing that. Um, so obviously you would love for your child to go on into mainstream schooling, like especially with his sister and his brother.
Yeah.
We don't know if that will be the case. And admittedly, nowadays there is a lot more support in schools for children on the spectrum and all special needs. But it's whether or not you want to put them in that position, because I felt like when we had Hugo, so Hugo's in an ABA therapy. I think I mentioned to you, he
Yeah.
started there in Feb this year, and honestly, he is really starting to thrive from that,
Okay.
which is amazing. Like, it's been such a short time, but he will. A classic example. They've been doing a countdown thing with him because he's a million miles an hour. Like, he's one thing to the next.
Yeah.
Won't wait if you say just wait. And admittedly, that's probably my fault too, a little bit, because I'm like, okay, don't have a breakdown here. What do you want? Have this. Lily, get
Yeah.
that. Freddie, out of the way. Like, just
Yeah.
avoid the breakdown.
Yeah.
But we're able to count down from 25 to 0 and make him stop and wait. And he will have eye contact with us
Oh, wow.
while we're counting down, which is huge. They started that from 5.
Yeah.
And then they've worked their way up to 25, which is amazing. Like, for example, the morning toast, I'll pop the toast down and normally he will press the blue button to flick it back up. And I'm like explaining, which obviously is not going through to him
Yeah.
at all. Like, you can't have just bread. Like, it's got a toast, got to leave it down there. Anyway, so we use the countdown in the morning. So he will wait. And then as soon as I get to 0, and then he says, press. And I say, yes, you can press it now. And he'll press it.
Yeah.
So that's been a huge change for him. And I can't wait to see what else will happen over the next few months, because it's already been such a short time frame that we're seeing these changes. But I think I did mention to you, and I'm getting a little bit off track, is we initially, when we had the diagnosis, we're like, okay, great, we'll do an extra speech therapy session, we'll do another OT session, thinking, oh, these are all helping, but they actually weren't. And no discredit to these people, but for a 3-year-old to be attentive and sit through a 45-minute session, at whatever time you could just pick up, because you're like, I want to get them there. They may be tired as heck, but you think, oh, they need this. And then you're flustered, they're flustered. No one wants to be there. And then you go away feeling really defeated. You're trying to implement what they've told you in that 45-minute session. And it's just too hard.
Yeah. And it
it
must
puts
be
a lot
so
of pressure on the
overwhelming.
family.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
it
it is.
is.
And it's also, I noted when Nick was going through that, it was very overwhelming for Nick.
Yeah.
There was just too much information given too quickly.
Yes, 100%. And then it was, oh, we'll change the approach because we've been doing this for 6 months and, he's not picking up what we're putting down. And I'm like, well, I'm barely picking up what you're putting down in these sessions. It's a lot. It's really hard and fast. And then it's disheartening because you're doing it for 6 or 12 months this little 2, 3-year-old, and you think that you're failing because you're like, okay, am I not trying hard enough at home? But then you're like, well, I'm not, a therapist, or this isn't me.
But when you think about it, if you and you're a bit younger than me, but even like now, if I go and I've got to go to a webinar or something, is if everything's given at once, really rushed, you never ever take it all in. You can't. So for a 2 or 3-year-old child, how can they? If you as an adult couldn't do it, that expectation on the child is quite huge. And that's where their communication, and I'm only speaking from my experience, okay?
Yeah.
It's not anyone else's. But my experience at that time was Nick would just shut down.
Yes.
And so I don't
And
want to
that
do
was
this.
similar to Hugo. Yes.
Yeah. Too much, too overwhelming. I once had a doctor say to me, and it was the best description I've heard of Asperger's, which is probably similar to, I think it's at a similar level. Mind you, you wouldn't think it if you saw my Nick now, is it's like being in a room where everyone's talking at once with the same level of intensity, the same tone of voice, and everyone's message is important.
Yeah.
How are you going to be able to filter out what is important, which versus what can be put aside and dealt with later?
Yeah.
And I
And
thought
that's
that was,
100%.
yeah,
And that's hard. Like, that's hard for their little mind
yeah.
as well. Like, they're so young and they don't know any different as well, which is
And
hard. But
but every step of their day is learning with smell and touch and sound and words and sight and everything. So the messages they're getting from every part of them would be all consuming.
yes, and overwhelming. And it's
Yeah.
any wonder they have these meltdowns when Hugo's melting down and he can't tell me. I'm thinking, okay, this is valid because I'm feeling like I'm going to have a meltdown in a minute. And it's a lot of patience as well, which, being a parent, you have to be patient. But I feel like it's a whole new level of patience, especially if it was probably just Hugo, it might be a little bit different. But, there's other children
Yeah.
that you have to worry about as well. So, yeah, circling back to what he's doing at the moment, it's called applied behavior analysis. Now,
Okay.
it's very intense, but in saying that, we've seen nothing but great results so
Yeah.
far. And I think that it suits Hugo especially, and we're only speaking from our experience.
Yeah.
Because they did a slow transition with him into the centre. It's 4 days a week. It's 9 till 4. So it's pretty hectic.
Yeah.
He's got a team of 4. He's got a behaviour specialist, a speechy, and then 2 other little carers who, they're all so lovely with him. And we're at a point now where this morning, for example, dropped Hugo off. He put his backpack on, met one of his teachers, held her hand, walked in, turned around, waved at me halfway.
Yeah.
Huge, which is so different to the
Yeah.
experience we had with him in mainstream daycare, because we kept telling ourselves, oh, well, if you surround him with other children, who essentially aren't autistic or whatever, like, it will help him. But
Yeah.
I think it actually made him regress a little bit because, I would get the updates on the app from the daycare, and I'd be looking, thinking, okay, where's Hugo? He's not participating in any of the group time,
Yeah.
which is so sad as a parent to think, okay, and they're just not equipped to cater for Hugo, I
Yeah.
think. So you can, through NDIS, get an additional person at the
Yeah.
daycare. You can apply for it, but that person, I found out, is not specific to Hugo. It's just extra hands in the room,
Oh,
which
okay.
I
Yep.
thought, I was like, okay, great, but that doesn't really give him that one-on-one that he needs. And we didn't know about this ABA therapy at all until think it's the CEO of North Melbourne got us onto it. It's actually located right near Jed's work as well.
Okay, yeah.
And we were like, oh, this sounds a bit intense. I don't know if that's for Hugo. Like, that's our first
Yep.
take back. And you do some research and you do find a few negative comments about this style of therapy, but they love Hugo and they incorporate learning into play. And that's what Hugo needs. And it's all at his level, at his pace. Like, they don't push anything. He's happy to go there, which I think is a great sign.
Yeah.
And it's goal setting specific to Hugo. So there's a lot of other children there. Obviously, everyone's different, but it's all very specific to that child, which I think is so important. There's no one size fits all.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's what it is with everyone. There is no one size fits all. The fact that they've worked out the best way to communicate with Hugo and they're using those techniques and those strategies, that's awesome stuff, because I think that's what people forget, isn't it? Everyone's different.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that for me, when I took Nick anywhere, was I would get, they would have meltdowns. And I think, just don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions. I mean, my boys used to be altar servers and they nearly had a fight on the altar one day because they were rostered on together. Two autistic boys rostered on together. Oh my gosh. And I'm sitting down in the congregation thinking, this is not going to be pretty. But the priest
Let them
stopped
work it
it.
out.
No, not on the altar. Halfway through mass, no. The priest dealt with it. But you know what? They're normal kids. And the moment people start making assumptions about anyone, and it's not just them, it could be assumptions about Lily or Freddie or you or your husband, about me and what I'm capable of or not capable of. I think that harms our society straight off.
Yep, it does.
Yeah. I mean, I've got to admit, that's one of the things I like about going to your studio is the notes are there for your staff to say, oops, here she comes. Don't touch the dog. Dog goes in the corner. Narelle will tell you what she can't do. But, they ask the question.
Yeah.
And that is the best part, just asking a question, isn't it?
Yeah. And
Or
I think
keep
that's a
walking and
good
leave
thing.
it.
Yeah. I encourage questions because I've got friends who have 3-year-olds and I've probably only got a small group of people that I could ever leave Hugo with, just because we're sort of at that level of it can be overwhelming for someone to think, okay, I don't know what he wants. But God bless Hugo, Freddie and Lily will speak on his behalf, as you've mentioned that before.
Yep.
So that's always reassuring. But yeah, I think asking questions needs to be encouraged more.
Yeah. So really what we're saying is communication will happen for Hugo, for Freddie. Freddie's already got it. But for Hugo, it will happen in Hugo's time and it will happen the best way that works for Hugo, which is exactly the same way as all of us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly right. We always say he's running his own race, and he'll get there. And he is such a good kid. Like, he's really sweet. And I can't believe, all the time that we spent in therapy over the probably past 18 months, forcing these ways on Hugo, thinking, okay, it's going to, he'll start speaking next month. That's what I kept telling myself. Like, that's all I wanted. I thought, okay, I just want to be able to have a conversation with him.
Yeah.
Because you'll see other 3-year-olds having little conversations. And now I've sort of accepted. I'm like, okay, we'll get there. May not get there anytime soon, but we will. So,
Amber, what's the takeaway? What's the message you want to give people out of all of this? So we've been discussing communication, which is obviously what I'm big about, and the fact I've only got 4 senses. Hugo's probably got about 1,000 senses. Hugo's the
Yes.
complete opposite to me. I know my son Nick has probably got 2,000 senses, it's what it
Yeah.
is. But we're saying everyone's different. You've only probably got 5 or 6. So we're lacking really compared to Hugo.
Yeah.
What's the message? What do you want to tell people about a child that is ASD level 3? They're perfect people. There's
They are
nothing wrong with
perfect.
them.
They're not any different to anyone else. They've just got a different skill set.
Yeah.
I think kind would come to mind. I think, when you see someone, whether it's like in my situation with a child having a breakdown because they can't communicate, don't stare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Smile, which I do often get. I'll get a smile, or, we've got our local petrol station that we go to, and Hugo has to go in there and get a Hot Wheels car nearly all the time, and they just expect it.
Yeah.
And they don't expect any acknowledgement from Hugo. He'll just throw it up on the counter and wait for it to be paid for. But I think kindness, and as a mum, on sort of flipping it over, I think you've got to trust your gut as well. If you think, okay, something's not right, like just keep pushing for an answer, and do your research as well. I think I didn't know half the stuff I know now about autism and ways to help. And yeah, like as I said at the start, no one sits you down and says, okay, this is your diagnosis. Here's the textbook on how we're going to help you with this. It's sort of you've got to figure it out. You've got to figure out how it works for Hugo. So yeah.
And I think you're right. And I think people need to remember Hugo communicates in Hugo's way.
Yes.
And Hugo's way is very different to mine. It's different to yours. And my son Nick, it's different to the way my son Nick communicates. Different to the way the bloke at the petrol station that gets the Hot Wheels dumped on his counter. They're happy,
Yes.
and it's all good. If there's no
Yep.
rudeness, and look, they're kids, they're going to be rude at times. Yeah,
Yes.
expect
Yeah.
it. But communication is still possible differently. Think outside the square. It's, I think, the extra thing I would add. Let the kids think outside the square, and you need to think outside the square yourself, because if we don't think outside the square, we're the ones that are missing out. Not Hugo.
Yeah.
Hugo's going
Yeah.
to have a good old time.
No, I definitely agree with that. And it comes in all forms too. I remember recently catching a flight. I was by myself. I saw this mum, she was by herself, had her baby in the carrier, and we're going through security. And, she just gave me the look, and I said to her, would you like me to hold your baby so you can get your carrier back on? And she's like, thank you so much. And I just think, like, we just had to look at each other, mum to mum, and there was that communication of, okay, I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks, Amber.
Takeaways.
Actually, I'll add one more. Just don't make assumptions. Never
Yes, love
assume.
that. Never
Just never,
assume, as
ever
Jed says, or you
assume.
make an ass out of you and
Bingo.
me. There's the takeaway point.
And number 2, don't let Hugo watch AFL, or, well, actually, no, Ackermanis and Jonathan Brown and Michael Voss, they're all
No longer.
no longer. Thank God.
No, it's Freddie we'll have to worry about. He will sit through a whole game. He's next level. So
yeah, good luck.
Totally different kids they are.
They're kids. Thanks, Amber. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And that's another episode of the Digital Access Show. So next week, we've had a chat with Amber about her wonderful son, Hugo. Next week is this lovely, lovely lady called Laura Garcia. And Laura has a daughter, a wonderful daughter that's just started high school. And Eva has no sight. And Eva is a Harry Potter fan. And the way Eva and Laura have managed education so that Eva is just excelling. And it's all about accessibility, and it's all about communication. So see you next time. Thanks for listening to us today. It's been a pleasure to have your company. If you really love what we're doing, and we hope you do, we hope you find the videos of interest, please like, subscribe, and share to everyone, and leave a Google review. See you next time.